I'm joined by John Hurd, who is from Newcastle Fans Against Sportswashing, and also Elise Martin, who is a women's rights activist for Saudi Arabian women. Thank you both for joining me today. It's a pleasure to see you.
Great to be here. Yeah.
Great to be here.
I think it's probably, by the guests, people can probably guess the tone of this episode. We're talking about Saudi Arabia's involvement in football, which has started maybe over the last couple of years and is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And at the time of recording, there's a multitude of famous footballers going to Saudi Arabia, making hundreds of millions of pounds. I mean, I think everyone will know the most famous one is obviously Cristiano Ronaldo, but I think every day there's another player going. There's other things happening, so it's a real growing issue. So I wanted to get you both on, maybe to talk about it. So John, maybe you could sort of give us a brief bit about your organisation and why you feel it's important to maybe speak out on this issue.
Okay, well, the history of Newcastle. People who listening might know about Newcastle United. It's a one team town, very working class city, post-industrial. Won a lot in the 1950s and before, and haven't won anything since 1969. But we've got massive support, and we've gone through different owners. And one of the worst was Mike Ashley, who basically used the club for his company, Sports Direct.
People not in the UK, John, maybe give us an explanation of who Mike Ashley is, because he's very well known.
I will explain.
Oh, sorry.
Mike Ashley's basically an owner of a few companies, but his main company was like cheap clothes called Sports Direct. That's what it was, and he used the club to advertise his company, but he never really invested in Newcastle, and basically kept between the Premier League and the First Division. So there was a lot of discontent, and a lot of fans as well, because it's a working class city, were against Ashley because he had this thing in Britain. It's called 0-hour contracts, which means like basically you only work for the hours that you're given. So he was a bad sort of example as an owner of a club, but also he wasn't running the club very, very well. So the Saudis, through Amanda Staveley, who's a minority shareholder now in Newcastle, she tried to basically broker a deal, and it went on for a while. And basically, what happened was the Premier League caved in to the pressure that was building up for the Saudis to take over, and they bought the club for 300 million. Now, on the day, it's a very famous incident, but on the day that Ashley sold the club, there was celebrations, dancing in the street. And what sort of like really got me to get involved in this was that there was people turned up dressed in Arab Saudi gear. There was Saudi Arabian flags there as well at the ground, and sort of celebrating that the Saudis had taken over, the Saudi regime had taken over. Now, some fans were celebrating because of Mike Ashley going, but basically it started, that was the first beginning of the question of the sports washing. So we, when I say we, I mean Newcastle United Fans Against Sports Washing, we linked up and we said, no, we're not going to allow the normalisation of one of the bloodiest dictatorships on the planet being owners of our club. And we got a lot of stick at first, we got a lot of abuse, and we'll go into all that later on, what the Saudi state does against us as well. But basically, we said we want to put down a marker, and we want to say, even though we're a small minority, we'll put down a marker, and we set up our group, and we've been grown since then. But basically, our aim is to say no to the normalisation of a bloody dictatorship owning our club, and also total 100% solidarity with the victims of the owners of Newcastle United.
Yeah, because, I mean, just sort of picking up that, John, I mean, initially when the takeover was happening, it was blocked, I think, and the government got involved because I think they were saying that the Saudi government or regime could not actually have direct ownership, and then there was some kind of paperwork, and it seemed to be, well, they're not actually directly involved, so they took over. Well, obviously, we all know they are directly involved, but there was a period where it was blocked, wasn't it? It wasn't happening, and then it happened. There
was 2 points. The first point was over pirating broadcasts of football. So it was a dispute with the well, Elise will know more about this, but the rivalry between Qatar and Saudi Arabia over broadcast rights of football, and they were basically pirating the football broadcasting. But also there was disquiet amongst some Premier League other clubs, because they're thinking, well, what does this mean? This is another state taken over a club. And there was, a few politicians were against it. But I don't think the majority of Newcastle fans and football fans in general really understood what it meant, because basically Man City's been run, been owned by the United Arab Emirates state through for a number of years. They've distorted the game in the Premier League, and now another state comes in. So what's next? Qatar's going to come in. But basically, it could be the beginning of the end of football as a sport, because even your multi-millionaire American owners of Liverpool or Manchester United can't compete with the state, because the state has bottomless pockets, and they didn't buy Newcastle because they love Tyneside, our region, or because they love Geordies or they love football. They bought it as a billboard, as a propaganda tool to normalise the repression that they're conducting in Saudi Arabia. That's what it's all about. A state is completely different from another owner. I might have my issues with the owners of Manchester United at the moment, or Arsenal or others. I've got my issues. I'm in favour of more like fan participation, fan ownership of clubs. But it's completely different. It's on a different level. A state owning a club than other types of owners.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elise, let's bring yourself in now. Maybe you could sort of give us a view, your sort of viewpoint, an overview of how you come to this. Obviously, you're not, invested in one football team, or I don't think you are. Maybe you are, but obviously, sort of women's rights for you. But the broader picture, what's your opinion on Saudi Arabia sort of creeping in and sort of becoming this big player in football?
Well, MBS has to do something, because he's either unwilling or unable to handle the situation on the ground, which is more likely that he's unwilling. He's starting with all his shiny buildings, and then he moved into sportswashing, because he's got a Saudi population, 70% are under the age of 30. So if you don't want them asking questions about the kidnappings and the murders and the journalists missing and everything, you give them quite a bit of a distraction. You also don't want the Western world seeing that, so you're going to distract them with that. And the biggest problem for football, especially since I love football myself, is if a dictatorship like Saudi Arabia owns a team like that, and the owner in itself has no integrity, it's going to put into question the integrity of the game. And then we move into something like wrestling, where that it's already planned who's going to win, and then the game is no longer exciting, right? And you can't trust the integrity of the owner, you can't trust the integrity of the game. So the fans should stand up and ask a question, because we want it to be integrity,
Absolutely. And at least, the great thing about having yourself on, not only have you got a lot of good views, but maybe people don't realize, you were raised in Saudi Arabia, so you're not talking about this from someone who has watched it on TV. You've actually lived there, you've experienced it. So maybe give us a picture of maybe what it's like for a woman like yourself day to day over there, because we hear a lot of people talking, a lot of men like myself, and I don't know what it's like to live day to day under oppression in Saudi Arabia, but you've obviously got a great insight into that.
Yes, I was raised Saudi, so I do have a Saudi last name, and I do have a Saudi tribe. I'm no longer, we call it tribal dysphoria, where you get disowned. But I had to get out of there. So I was under male guardianship myself, and I didn't live in America officially, even though I was an American citizen, until the age of 30. So it was a big ordeal. So I personally lived under male guardianship, and these women seriously don't have any source for recourse. Women aren't allowed to watch sports without the permission of a male guardian. We're not allowed to go to these games. MBS is showing that we have concerts now and we have movie theaters and but the truth on the ground is that even if women are going to sports matches and we're seeing it on the media, they do need permission from a male guardian to leave their homes. They need permission from a male guardian, even if that male guardian is abusive and they go to these shelters where they're supposed to be protected, because MBS rolled out the new personal status law. It said we're going to make houses for women who are abused by a father or a stepfather or a brother, so they can go find, shelter and help. But these shelters are nothing more than prisons. Once the girl goes in, the only person who can get her out is her male guardian, which could be the same man who beat her up in the first place. So it's just disgraceful, and he's covering it up with sports. He's trying to buy credibility, and he's not going to be successful in buying credibility unless he starts fixing his human rights violations. To fix a country, you need to start from the ground up, not start from the top with these shiny buildings, and let's just paint it over with sports and pretend it's not happening. I mean, he's sending women to prison for 34-year sentences. Salman Shahab, for example, a mother of children who's so young, and she's going to be in prison for 34 years because she just wrote a tweet about she just questioned women's rights. Like, couldn't we have more rights? Couldn't we focus on this? She questioned male guardianship. I mean, it's utterly disgraceful. And then after her 34-year sentence, she's going to have a 34-year travel ban where she'll basically wear an ankle bracelet and be stuck at home. And if she ever speaks again, she'll be right back in prison where she is. We don't even know if she's being tortured. We know that she was on hunger strike. So it's very, very concerning. And it's happening daily. Every time someone stands up, he just puts them away. He doesn't want them to see. And then he goes and buys another sports team and like, here, look here. Don't look here. Right. And it's just utterly disgraceful.
And Elise, if I could ask you maybe, sorry, John, when you go, carry on.
I just wanted to add to that because it's great to have Elise here, because just to say, this is about sports washing. How does it work? So I can give you the scenario, what happens in Newcastle. So in Newcastle, the agent for Mohammed bin Salman was Amanda Staveley, who's a woman. Okay. And she's got 10%. Okay, so a lot of the pro-regime fans will say, well, how can the Saudis be sexist or misogynist because they have a woman up front? That was at the beginning. And also they've allowed a women's team. Now we've got articles, we've got a fanzine called Hailstones in the Desert. We've had 3 issues of it. And we've got an article from a Saudi woman and also a woman who's involved in women's football, and they say it's absolute hypocrisy because what they do is they say in Newcastle, we're progressive, we're doing this, but on the other hand, you mentioned Salma al-Shabaab, Nora al-Qatani, 40 years, mother of 5, 40 years in prison. A young fitness teacher who's just been detained for advocating. For free speech. So on the one hand, they say, this is in Newcastle. The other argument with the sports washing one, they say, well, if the Saudi regime has contact with the good people of Newcastle, then they'll see what openness and liberal values is, and they'll change. Well, the absolute fact is, and you know this better than anyone, since MBS came into power, things have got absolutely worse. They've got absolutely worse. There's more people being executed since he came to power. And before Newcastle, you probably know this, but before Newcastle played Chelsea last season on the 12th of March, we played on the 13th. I think it was an arrogant act and a cruel act by Mohammed bin Salman, just to say, I can do it. But they ordered the execution of 81 people. Imagine that, a mass execution of 81 people the day before we played. And I personally, I think it was just and we know what dictators are like. I'm in charge. I can do it. My club doesn't matter, and that's what they did, So this is how the sports wash works. So the other side of it as well, I think what you said about, I was interested in what you said about the young population, and I think as well, this is an important point, is that they've just the Saudi state has just nationalized or taken over the PIF has taken over 4 football clubs, and they're trying to turn the Saudi league, into a super league. But also, sports washing is for internal consumption. A lot of people forget that. They use it and say, look, we are accepted in Newcastle, we are accepted in Spain with the Spanish Super Cup. So it's not just outside. It's for internal use as well,
Yeah, it's bread and circuses to cover up oppression. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And give them bread and circuses and distract them, and then start weeding out whoever opposes you. Ultimate power, ultimate dictatorship, and it's terrible. The people want more representation. And I feel like myself as a woman, we can't start with more representation inside Saudi Arabia unless women also have the right to be participants, and we don't have rights. We're minors in perpetuity until we die. That's a nice way to put it. Basically, it's a modern day form of slavery. To have permission over our own bodies by a male guardian. It's even when we're over the age of 40, 30, 60, your husband could die and your guardianship gets transferred to your young son or your your husband's brother, even worse, someone who doesn't even know you properly, because, men and women don't mingle internally. Not a lot of families do, some, but not a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, this is not an attack on Arab people, Middle Eastern people, no. Saudi Arabian people. I think we're all talking about the regimes here. There's a lot of good people in these parts of the world that, are under this regime as well. And we're kind of doing this podcast sort of for, or maybe not for them, but, to hear their stories as well. So this is not an ad, because I've heard that quite a few times. Well, people are anti-Arab and, they're getting, I don't think anyone has got a problem with Arab people being involved in football. It's the type of people that are involved, regardless of whether Arab or not. People don't want a dictator, people of a regime who flagrantly abuse human rights and just, as you say, it's catastrophic what's going on. One thing I want to put to you both is I also hear a phrase a lot of times on podcasts and a lot of media on this subject is, let's just keep politics out of sport. Let's just have sport for sport. Let's just watch your football, enjoy it, and then we can talk about politics in a different forum. What do you say to that?
We can't separate it at this point, because what he's doing is highly political. He's trying to cover stuff up by using sports, and it's just unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, I would say in Newcastle context, it's been very, very sharp, the debate. And it's getting sharper, But before the takeover, every single MP, and most of them are Labour, every councillor, most of them, fanzines, which are the fans magazines, and official fan groups said, if the Saudis take over, we will hold them to account regarding human rights. Okay, that was a commitment.
Okay.
Up to today, 18 months later, not one of these groups has called them. We've asked them, and also other Saudi human rights groups that we work with have asked specifically to bring up cases. And some fans say, well, it's politics, you're bringing it. No. It was the Saudi regime which brought their politics to Newcastle when they were allowed to buy to buy the club. But this point about should we raise these issues? In Saudi Arabia and outside as well, for example, Messi, who gets millions as an ambassador for Saudi Arabia, which is incredible. Why does he need any more money? Or Ronaldo are routinely asked by the families of victims to say something. Stephen Gerrard, who's just taken over as manager of one of the clubs, the first thing the human rights group says, well, say something. Now, we get criticised for saying, because we were approached by a brother of a guy who was basically on the run in Morocco. He hadn't done anything, but he was just highlighted by the regime, and they extradited him from Morocco to Saudi Arabia. His brother, and normally, obviously, because of security and safety, Saudis don't use their names. But this guy was so desperate that his brother was going to be extradited and put on a death death sentence, that he wrote a letter to Eddie Howe, who was the manager of Newcastle, the coach, and we delivered it on behalf of this brother. And in the letter, it's an incredible letter. But what he says, he said, "Mr. Howe, players of Newcastle, people of Newcastle, you think that if you say something about human rights, nothing will happen and the Saudi regime won't change." He said, "Well, don't think that." He said, "MBS and the regime are listening all the time. The reason why they bought the club is that so people don't talk about human rights. So why don't you stick to your commitments, talking to the fans and the MPs and the councillors in Tyneside, and just raise specific cases? Talk about Salman, talk about Nora, talk about those 9 young guys on death row at the minute. Just mention their names, say their names, and that would be a test for Tyneside and for Newcastle fans, because if the regime saw backlash and saw that fans were speaking out, would they stay? That's the question. Would they stay? And would they be able to take the criticism? Because at the moment, there's a pact of silence. Unfortunately, there's a pact of silence on Tyneside. It's like, I'm not saying the majority of fans are in favour of the regime. They're not. They like the money. They like the way Newcastle are playing. But a lot of fans are uncomfortable. And our role, what we do in our campaign, is to say, look, just stick to your commitments. Say something about these people. Say their names. Stop the slaughter. That's all you have to do. And let's see what the reaction of the regime is. I'm sure I should know what the reaction would be if we did that,
Elise, yeah, maybe you could tell us, if that was to say, if people in Newcastle, players, coaches, were to start bringing these things up, what would be the reaction in Saudi Arabia?
He's speaking to me.
Yeah, no, I was asking. Yeah, I'll rephrase it just so we can cut it. So if the players, the coaches at Newcastle, were to start speaking out, bringing up human rights things, making their points, what do you think the reaction would be in Saudi Arabia?
They could lose their contracts, obviously, or whatever.
Yeah.
But there is a degree of evil that can't be ignored. There's a great degree of oppression that can't be ignored, and there's. With great power, with great exposure comes great responsibility. I believe in this, right? I am not in Saudi Arabia, or I would be on the ground helping create a movement myself, but I can't be there. I'm in danger. But as an American woman and having the freedoms I do, it's my responsibility to give back. And it's my responsibility to speak out. And it's my responsibility to speak for those who are, as you say, forced into this pact of silence.
What do you think is going through the players' mind, John? The players earn, hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars, whatever currency, but, they're very, very wealthy men. But they could get similar contracts elsewhere. Newcastle's not the only well-paying football team in the world. There is a choice. No one has to go to. These guys are all really good players. The other clubs would take them. They don't have to play for Newcastle. Okay, maybe they're getting 50% more money or 20% more money or whatever it is, but they don't have to play. Do you think they process it? Do you think they ignore it? What do you think goes through their mind? Because I find it bizarre. If I was a footballer, I don't think I could square it away.
Well, I think there probably are some players who wouldn't go for ethical, humanitarian, political reasons, but we never get to find out, do it? But the amounts of money on offer are incredible. Obviously, they're just incredible amounts of money. And obviously, Newcastle and Manchester City are going to be, already Manchester City, but they're skewing the transfer market this year. All the prices have gone up for players. So, but also they're very young people as well, and obviously they're insulated. Most of them are quite rich before they even go to Newcastle. But also you've got to understand the atmosphere in Newcastle. One of the things that's come out recently about this is that in Manchester as well with City, but also in Newcastle, that the local press have been basically acting like a giant megaphone for the club and for the regime, and that they've actually had hardly any criticism. I'll give an example. For example, I don't know his name. I still know the name, but Mohammed bin Salman's brother, who's like the money man of the regime. was at the Carabao Cup final in the box with a Newcastle scarf on. And we mentioned this to the local press. Not one of them picked it up. Yeah. But the national press do. And then that causes a bit of friction between Newcastle and the rest of the country. But the other thing as well, there's other regime figures, I'll not mention them all, but there's figures that turn up at games, they follow the club on Twitter, and it's mentioned in the local press like it's a great thing. And these people, some of them are torturers. Some of them are like been committing war crimes in Yemen. And the thing is, what? Are we going to just let that go? That's a problem. So obviously, if you're a young player, and you're quite well off, and you're offered even more to go to Newcastle, and you meet the sort of like manufactured atmosphere that's there. Everything's going well. We'll not talk about if the fans aren't talking about it, or if the MPs aren't talking about it. Why are young players going to talk about it? That's the thing. But I'll give an example. An interesting example is Alan Shearer. Obviously, you know who Alan Shearer is.
Famous English. If anyone's maybe not a big, he's a record, very big goal scorer. I think he's a record goal scorer for Newcastle, or is he?
He's the Premier League record.
Retired now. Yeah.
He's from Newcastle. Okay, and he's a pundit on the TV. Very interesting thing happened, because at the beginning he writes for various papers, but he's on the BBC with Gary Lineker, who was another famous footballer. And he, before the takeover, he said there's human rights issues. That's like a euphemism for torture, beheading. They say issues, yeah. But he said, there's issues, and we shouldn't be afraid to bring it up when the takeover happened. Well, since then, he hasn't said anything. But in about 4 or 5 months ago, Gary Lineker tweeted something on a completely different subject about refugees. Okay, and he was attacked by the right in Britain and told that he couldn't say that, he couldn't show sympathy for refugees. He sort of compared the policy to the Nazis. Okay, now he was going to be sacked from his job as the main presenter of football on BBC, and Alan Shearer and another presenter went on strike basically in solidarity, and they said, we support Gary Lineker's right to free speech. So great, that's a ex-footballer doing that. So we said immediately to Alan Shearer, we sent him a message, we appealed, and we said, look, if the free speech of Gary Lineker is important to you, which it is, what about the free speech of Salman, Nora, all the young people who have been imprisoned for tweeting in Saudi Arabia? So that's the big contradiction. And I think a lot of people in Newcastle, including Alan Shearer, they're doing like headstands, the somersaults to justify it. Because if you can defend Gary Lineker's right to free speech, why not Saudi people? Why not?
And the Saudi women need the football fans, and they need the soccer players, and they need all of these people to speak up and say it's enough, it's oppression, it's not acceptable. Their money is tainted, and we shouldn't even be touching it. We don't want their money. We don't want them to take our football league. We don't want them to taint the authority and the integrity of our football fans, our games. We need everyone to stand up. It's an atrocity what's happening over there, and his way of covering it up is just absolutely disgraceful.
Elise, maybe I could ask you, because aside from Newcastle, we're now seeing a lot of footballers moving to Saudi Arabia. Cristiano Ronaldo is the most famous, but there's many, and I think 4 have left London to go from Chelsea to go to Saudi Arabia in the last couple of weeks, and and now we're starting to see it's not only superstars. It's well-known players, but it's not only superstars now that are going there. When they go there, if these players are not aware of all the things we're talking about, what will they find in the country? Will this be discussed at all? Will there be anything on YouTube? Will there be anything in newspapers? Or will it be wall-to-wall propaganda and nothing about all these atrocities? Will it just not be mentioned when they get there?
No, well, they're selling their souls and their integrity for money, basically. They get there and they're just put up in these fancy houses, and everything for them is covered, and they just turn a blind eye. And a lot of time, just like if you're a tourist, you can go visit Saudi Arabia. You're not going to see the ground level. They keep you, and if you're a reporter, they assign you a tourism official to take you around, who's really a spy. to make sure you don't go where you're not supposed to be seeing, what you're not supposed to be seeing. So I think they take the money and then they just turn a blind eye. Absolutely. They want to turn these players into puppets for his own propaganda machine, you know, and that's what's happening. They're taking the money and they're becoming puppets. They're taking the money and saying, okay, where do you want me to stand? Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? Okay, take this picture, have this photo up. You know, they get what they want, and it's just disgraceful. They just cover it up.
And I mean, and I think maybe underlining it, I mean, a lot of them will have, obviously not just women involved in this, but I mean, as you see, there's a lot of women's rights atrocities, and a lot of these players will have wives, daughters, girlfriends, mothers.
But
I don't know why. Yeah.
They're granted exceptions. I mean, there was one soccer player that went over and he had a girlfriend. He's living with his girlfriend. I mean, if a Saudi man is living with his girlfriend and everybody knows about it, he's going to before court. He's going to prison. That woman might be stoned to death, but he's an exception. So let's just accept that. I mean, you can imagine the uproar on the internal level among Saudi women that this isn't fair. There's a different rule for our propaganda puppets than there is for every other woman on the ground. It's not fair.
But I think we've got to find a way to get to these young players as well. So some of them are, the ones who are going to Saudi Arabia are older. But I think we've got to find a way to get to them and get the message. You know, one of the points that comes across all the time in Newcastle is we raised the case of these 9 guys who are on, I haven't got time to say all their names, but there's 9 who are on death row, and they were children when they were arrested. It's very cruel what they do. Some of them they're arrested in the Eastern Province around Dammam and that area. And they arrest them, they play cat and mouse with them, and they re-arrest them when they're 18. You know, some of them were tortured for their confessions and all that. Now, when we've publicised those cases, unfortunately, some fans will say things like, "Oh, but they're terrorists." Now, where does that come from? That comes directly from Riyadh. From they have a bot farm in Riyadh, you'll know about this, and they basically put out propaganda all the time, and you can tell it's but then unfortunately some fans repeat it. And the thing is, what we've got to get across to these players, because I think players are human beings as well, even though they're rich. But it's not ruled out that there's going to be more atrocities. It's unfortunate, but there's going to be more atrocities, more executions. They're building up for all the human rights groups are saying. And the point that we make is always, why are they executing so many people? Why are they jailing women? And the point is, they're afraid. They're afraid of the Saudi population. That's why he doesn't do it. Well, he's a cruel person, MBS, but it's a dictatorship. It's a royal dictatorship. It's a regime, and the Newcastle chairman is part of that regime. He's a minister in the government. Yasser Al Rumayya. He's part of the government. We've got a chairman of Newcastle who was part of a despotic regime. But the point we're making to the fellow fans is this idea that it's going to be forever, and they're going to make loads and loads of money. We're going to win loads and loads. That the money from Saudi Arabia is forever. Well, political things can change. A lot can change in Saudi Arabia. Look what happened in Iran last year. There was a revolution of women in Iran. And why is MBS going for women? Why are they jailing women? Because they fear women, but they fear above all young people and young women. So this idea that it's forever. I think our message always to Newcastle fans, it's better to come out now clearly and say, like you've said, we're against it. We don't want this money, because it'll end in tears. Unfortunately, it's going to end in tears. There's not going to be a happy ending. There's not going to be MBS, I believe in democracy, I'm going to democratize the country. No, the Saudi people will bring down MBS. That's what's going to happen.
That's the only way it's going to happen.
We have to be honest about it. You know?
He's arresting these people because he's afraid. When you have a population that's 70% under the age of 30 and they start asking questions, then you get an uprising, right? The older generations are not going to ask as many questions. They've been raised with the brainwashing starts when you're young. This is how you do things. You don't ask questions about this. One of my biggest platforms is ask questions. Ask about your world. Ask why things are this way. Ask why they can't be better. And when you talk about the young people who are arrested, now the Saudi regime promised they would stop executing children, but they promise one thing and then they actually do it anyway. So they capture the children, they lock them up, they play cat and mouse, and then they execute them when they turn 18 and say, oh, they were terrorists. But you have to think of what Saudi regime defines as a terrorist. The terrorist law could define a terrorist as anyone who opposes the agenda MBS is pushing. So anyone
who on a demonstration. Yeah.
You just ask a question on Twitter, you're deemed a terrorist. Salman is deemed a terrorist, and she just asked, hey, why don't women have more rights? And now she's a terrorist. I mean, it's just easier for them with the Western propaganda machine to say they were a terrorist, because after 9/11, everybody's like, oh, if they were a terrorist, I don't want to support them. I don't want to touch this, you know? And it's very sad.
Yeah. I mean, John, what about if Newcastle fans just didn't go to the game? Do you think that would solve the issue? And why don't they? What is it the Newcastle fans can't see about all this? Because, I mean, in Britain, we've got so much access to media and the world internet. You must be living under a rock. I'm being quite frank, but you'd have to be living under a rock not to know or not to have some awareness of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, particularly if your football club's owned by the regime. Why don't they just not go to the game and make their point? Why do 50,000 go every week?
Well, 52,000, yeah.
Okay.
Every 2 weeks. But that's an interesting point, though, because it's something that we are very, very clear about. We don't advocate a boycott, but we've recently published the fanzine. In that, there's a really excellent article by one of the members of the campaign who explains what he went through to actually decide that he was never going to go again. He'd been going for 30 years with his dad from when he was 6, and he decided not to go. And the reason why he decided not to go is we had a meeting with ESOHR, who are a Saudi human rights group, and two of the people there basically explained what they went through. I won't go into the sort of names and all that, but one of the people had been imprisoned, tortured, and escaped. And he actually put in the conversation, he goes, I couldn't believe when people were celebrating, that the Saudi regime had taken over. And he said, I'm an Alan Shearer fan. I was. And he said, I used to support Newcastle. And we were like really taken aback. But our colleague said, after that, in good faith, he couldn't go to the match anymore. Now, there are people, Newcastle fans, and I know them, obviously you mix with people who sort of got your same point of view or whatever. But basically, a lot of people said, I'm not going anywhere. But there's a lot of excitement, okay? But what we say is, it's your own personal choice. If you want to do a boycott, do a boycott. But we have to build a campaign before we get like a mass boycott. You can't just do it as an individual. We need to build a campaign to get even bigger. But I would say things could change. For example, I think we mentioned before, Saudi Arabia arrogantly have said they want to have an international at St. James's Park. All this thing, it's not part of the Saudi state, Newcastle. Now they want to play an international against Mexico on September the 11th. And, it's just saying we can do what we want. They're very arrogant. So we're saying it shouldn't go ahead. But also, if that takes place, there should be protests. We should take in banners. We should have the names Salma. We should have Nora. We should have these 7 young guys on.
Has anyone tried to do that? Do you know, John? Has anyone tried to take these names into the stadium?
I tell you, we did a protest outside the ground. It was a silent protest. We got a lot of stick. We got threatened with violence and everything. But
from who? Who threatened you?
Well, we got there was on some forums that said that we're going to get beat up if it turned up, and there was a lot of stuff from Saudi bots. But in the end, we made a statement. We told the press and said, look, majority of Newcastle fans are good people and they won't attack one. There was a few tired and emotional people, if you know what I mean, at the end, but most people came up and talked to her, and they said, "Well, what's it about? We don't agree with you." But anyway, it's an ongoing thing. But the point about boycotts is that, as I said, you've got to build for it. You've got to have a campaign. But for example, you imagine Newcastle wins something, and MBS comes to Newcastle. He'll want to bask in. This is the guy who wanted to sit next to the FIFA president in the Qatar World Cup. He craves the limelight. So you think all the money that he's paid, or the regime's paid, that he's not going to want to turn up at Newcastle one day. They're trying it. He sent his brother to the cup final. So I think that could be a turning point. I think the regime's made a big mistake calling for a Saudi international game at Newcastle, because a lot of fans are saying, well, this is too much, it's too far. So I think it's an ongoing campaign, and that it depends as well. Unfortunately, if there's more more beheadings, more mass executions, another war, which is not ruled out as well, then that obviously is going to affect the support. But I keep going back to the point. It's not a straight line. It's not like everything's going to be fantastic for Newcastle. They're in the spotlight now, and actually they're going to be in the Champions League next year. And there's some countries, particularly Germany, where they have a completely different philosophy about football. It's 50% plus one, the ownership. The fans have a big say. Bayern Munich fans have just managed to get rid of the Qatar sponsorship. So if Newcastle think they're going to get a great reception, not the fans, but like the institution owned by the Saudi dictatorship, they think they're going to get a good reception, they'll have to think again, because in a lot of European countries, people won't stand for it, and there'll be protests,
I hope
What do you think, Elise, if Newcastle were to maybe win a tournament or get Champions League high profile, do you think MBS would attach himself to that? I mean, I don't think he's I don't want to give the guy any credit. I don't think he's a stupid man, but I don't think he's a good man. But do you think he's quite calculating about when he will attach himself, maybe publicly, to something like Newcastle? Will he wait for a big spotlight and kind of swoop in there and get the press, or do you think he's always going to try and stay in the background of this?
Oh, absolutely. He's going to want the press. He loves being in the limelight. He loves showing himself as some kind of modern day ruler who's going to move Saudi Arabia into the future and take it away from all the things people know Saudi Arabia to be through tourism washing and sports washing. You think he's going to miss up a chance to stand and tote how he's brought this beautiful things happened, and look at me, and I've done it all. Why do you think he's building all these magnanimous buildings? They're like erections in his honor. Like, it's ridiculous.
I mean, one thing I also wanted to ask John, and at least you'll be well familiar with the Saudi Arabian colours, that the flag, it's green and white. I don't know if there's a particular shade of green. Is it a particular shade of green, or is it just, Elise, or is it just?
You say it's like a palm tree green. That would be right.
Palm tree green, and Newcastle obviously play in black and white stripes, but their alternate kit, away kit, whatever you want to call it, is essentially, if you were to sort of look at it, it looks exactly like the Saudi Arabian national team's kit, which same colours, and I'm sure that's not just by accident. What do you make of that, Elise? That the fact that they're actually playing in Saudi Arabian colours as their alternate, because before, John, am I right? Green and white was never a Newcastle thing. Am I correct?
They have had green, but it's not a shirt that looks like a national team colours. Not like now. No.
When you think about the MBS and his ways, I mean, I would wonder if he chose Newcastle because he was like, what soccer team shall I buy today? That one's got green colors like ours. Let's get that one. It's like shopping.
Yeah,
makes it easier for him because he doesn't have to change the uniforms, and it'll still be appealing to the Saudi people.
Yeah, but the thing about this is that it goes back to the sports washing as being a process, because at the beginning there was a lot of time and effort spent by the Northeast press, and also people who thought they were going to gain something from it, who said basically it's not the Saudi state, it's the PIF. It's got nothing to do. There's no relation. Now we don't even have these arguments. Now, 18 months later, people just say, yeah. Even the people who before were saying, oh, it's not the Saudi state. It's a dead argument. And one of the reasons is because of what happened in America, what happened in the United States, because, it's generally about sports washing. But, the Saudi regime came in to do a rival tournament to PGA, isn't it? The PGA Golf, and set up Live, and so much money was involved, and there was actually a massive court case, and in the court case, they said they asked for the Newcastle chairman to come to court and to give a disposition. And he said, no, I can't go. And they sent some papers and actually said, because I'm a minister in a sovereign government. Now, previously they said to the Premier League that the Saudi state would not be involved with Newcastle; it would be the PIF. But then it turns out that the argument they used to the Premier League is a different one that they used in the American courts. So they've got, we say, a lot of cheek. Like, they'll say one thing in the UK and then in the United States. So now it's common knowledge that the Newcastle chair is a key member of the regime. He's a government minister. And the big mistake they made. This is interesting how dictatorships make mistakes, and they don't. Because they're so arrogant and cut off. It's not a democracy. But they had a video to celebrate Newcastle, the season, and going into the Champions League. And this is incredible. But at the start of it, there was a Geordie guy doing the interview, and he had the chair in front of him, and he said, "Okay, Your Excellency." What? Your Excellency? What? I've never heard that in my life. Calling a chairman of a club. So obviously, they say, "Oh, he's just a nice guy. He's just a businessman," and all that. Who insisted that he was called Your Excellency in front of in an interview for the fans in Newcastle? And it went down like a lead balloon. Even people who support the regime in Newcastle say, "This is embarrassing," And he went on the last game. He went on the pitch. And he had a jacket with Newcastle strips on, and kicking the ball around. And a lot of people were saying, this is a guy who's in the government. This is a guy who's in the government, and he's playing kick around on St. James's Park. So I agree with you. But what you just said about MBS, they haven't paid all this money to stand in the background. No. They want. Not the Saudi culture, not the Saudi people. They want their regime to be basically accepted. That's what they want. That's what they're trying to do. And
maybe if I can ask you both sort of it's a final question, but maybe slightly different angles to it. And I'll start with you, John. If Newcastle were not to be successful, I mean, right now I think they finished fourth in the Premier League. They've qualified Champions League, which is a vast improvement on what they've been doing over the last 10, 15 years. If the success was to stop, do you think people then would become a bit more moral?
Well, that's if it's only based on success or failure, I think. What are we doing? What are we doing having a campaign? We've got to convince people. We've got to win hearts and minds. Like Elise was saying, we've got to campaign. We've got to win people over to our point of view, and we think we can. We think in 18 months we've started to do it, but I don't think it shouldn't depend on winning or losing.
But do you think it does for most people? It shouldn't. But what do you think?
What I think is that the one of the old members of the campaign who remember Newcastle winning things in the 1950s, he said, "Look, John," he says, "the way it is, the Saudi state are very sophisticated. They've paid an American company $1 million for PR. We are volunteers. It's like we haven't got any money, but we're trying to get out the word. So they've paid billions. So obviously they've discussed with MPs, councillors. They've offered people things. They've had 2 trips to Jeddah and to Riyadh." And they've taken Newcastle fans. They've done all that, so they know how to get people on board. There's loads of podcasts and people, probably making a bit of money. But at the end of the day, it's going to be like it shouldn't depend on winning or losing. It has to depend on people thinking it's wrong. But this guy said to me, he said, look, what they've done is they'll get on board a small minority of fans, and that's with the way it's gone. They've got like a small minority who are prepared to speak up for them, call victims terrorists, etc. Then there's people like us, we are a grown section. Probably we're bigger than the minority who speak up for the regime, and we are the ones who criticise and say speak up for human rights. And then you have the people in the middle, the massive Newcastle fans, who are good people, believe in human rights, but they don't see any alternative. That's the problem. And you say, well, what's the alternative? Everybody, Man City are owned by a dictatorship. What Man United are going to be? So we in the 18 months that we've been campaigning, we've had to reach out to fans of other clubs and to say it's not just about human rights, it's about the future of football. But we think that the silent majority in the middle can be won over. And I don't think it will depend on winning or losing. Honestly, I think it's going to depend more on events in Saudi Arabia and world events, and what happens in Saudi Arabia.
I hope you're right, but I mean, I have my doubts. I've got to say, just the way I look at Newcastle games, I see people wearing stuff and going to the games and celebrating the players they've got and the manager, and no one ever talking about it. It just sort of, I think we call football the beautiful game, the people's game. All you need is a ball to play. There's no equipment. You can play in barefoot in Africa, or you can play in an expensive city like New York or whatever. It's a game everyone can play, but I just think there's been a total lack of morality here, and I despair if that's maybe not exaggerating too much.
I despair too, and I'll say this, but then I have to sign off. But it's not about winning or losing. It's about continually raising awareness. Yeah. People will get the message. People will come to our side, but we have to not give up the good fight. Never stop, never surrender, never give up. That's what we need to be doing.
In fact, it's a brilliant message, because when we met with Saudi activists for the first time, they said, are you serious? Are you serious about bringing this up? He says, because if you bring it up once, and we did a protest outside, he said, you've got to do it again. We said, why? He says, because the MBS and the regime are watching. Because if you do one protest, even if it's small, you've got to do it again. You can't let these people down. And I totally agree with you.
Never give up.
We're going to keep going.
We need you. We need all of you. We need. But you can't stop. You can't stop. Once you've started, you can't stop. It's just not fair. You're giving them hope. You're giving them strength. You're giving them a voice. We have to keep going. It's not about winning or losing. It's about keeping up the good fight.
Elise, can I just ask you one thing very quickly? Will people in Saudi Arabia, the ordinary person, will they care about Newcastle and be bothered if Newcastle are winning or losing? Will anyone care? Or are they really, will it bother them that MBS has bought this club? Will they feel an attraction to it, or will they not be bothered?
Well, they love soccer in Saudi Arabia. One of the biggest cartoons of our youth, my generation anyways, was Captain Majid, and it was a Japanese cartoon soccer player, and every episode was score and goal. We'd all wait every day until 12 o'clock for it to come on the local channels. So they love soccer of all kinds. All children play it when they're young. It's a national pastime, just like it is in England.
So they'll be getting linked into Newcastle. The youth will be seeing this propaganda and maybe attaching themselves to Newcastle in a positive way.
Will start to consider Newcastle as their team now as well.
Well, they've already started. They have a Newcastle Twitter handle is in Arabic. They have material in Arabic, and they've already said they had the visit to Riyadh. They had like a supporters group there, and the aim is, because most Saudi football fans support Real Madrid, Barcelona, Man United, Liverpool, these sort of clubs, but they said their aim is to get them the biggest supported club in the Middle East. That's their aim. So it's said before, it's for internal use as well. The sports
about this on a side note, Saudi Arabia won one game in the World Cup and they declared it a national holiday. So it was fun for MBS to see his people out happy that the Saudi team won. Now, it's not uncommon knowledge that our Saudi team sucks, like seriously sucks. They can't play for anything. So now they've gone and bought, a team that can play for something, right? So now they have more national holidays. And guess what? That creates more bread and circuses. The population is distracted, so they can kill more journalists and continue with the propaganda machine. It's obvious. It's so obvious, but
I hope you guys have made it obvious, and people out there can take it. So, Elise Martin, a women's rights activist for women in Saudi Arabia. Gerrard from Newcastle Fans Against Sportswashing. Thank you very much for joining me. You can find them both. Do you want to maybe give a shout out where you guys can be found online if anyone would like to join your campaigns or reach out to you guys? What's the best places to find you?
On Twitter, it's very, very easy. It's at No Saudi Toon. Toon as in Newcastle for town. No Saudi Toon. And the website's very easy. Newcastle Fans Against Sportswashing. Just look for that and you'll find it.
Yeah, and my website is Elise Evans, ELISEEVANS.com, and my Twitter is Elise M. Martin at Twitter, and just easy to find. Reach out, tell me your stories, ask me your questions. I'm here. So,
brilliant. Well, thank you again for both of you speaking out. Not enough people do speak out, and you guys are putting your head above the parapet. So, respect from me, and thank you very much for joining.